Welcome to Matt's Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier, and I've had a good night's sleep, thankfully, so good to be back again. Just to remind you, Mindspeak is this Saturday. We're hosting the Think Business CEO, Banking CEO of the Year, Munir Ahmed of National Bank. Mindspeak is held at the Intercontinental. We serve breakfast from 9:30. We've had great guests this year, and in fact, since we started it, but this year we've had Christine Lagarde, Dr. Naikuni, Charles Ireland, and Dr. Richard Sesibera of the EAC. Rufus, who does my camera work, put together a little Mindspeak teaser. That link is on the website if you care to have a look. I spoke on Radio France about Kenya's biggest project in the post-colonial era. This is the railway. If you get a chance, do have a look at that. And I love this photograph I took as we were taking off from Amsterdam, and I was sitting in a window seat, and to my left I could see the sun setting over Europe, and I've even used it on my Twitter photograph that you can use. I saw all my girls yesterday except for Aisha, who called me from school, and I said to Nishat, "Aisha called me," and she said, "Oh, she never calls me." And I wanted to shout out, "But darling, who's her daddy?" Anyway, it was good to see the girls. Political reflections, I liked this quote of Harold Pinter saying, "The scale of our indoctrination," wrote Harold Pinter, "is a brilliant, even witty, highly successful act of hypnosis." And then this quote from Henry Kissinger, "What matters is not truth," Henry Kissinger once said, "but what is perceived to be true." Outstanding article by William Dalrymple in the New Statesman about Narendra Modi, man of the masses. In the intense afternoon heat, the streets of Delhi lay deserted. April is hot in northern India. But on this occasion it was not, because the capital was befuddled by the sort of gasping summer temperatures that Truman Capote described as a white midnight. Isn't that beautiful? Instead, the streets were empty because it was polling day in the Delhi leg of the largest and most complex election in human history. By the time the results were announced on 16th May, 815 million voters, more than 12 times the population of the United Kingdom, or even 2.5 times the population of the US, will have cast their vote at one of the 900,000 polling stations. And then describing it, Rahul came across as conceited and dim, if not borderline messianic and delusional. As he talked about himself in the third person, "You've got to understand a little bit about who Rahul Gandhi is," he began. "Everybody understands that this fellow here is not just a superficial chap who just talks. This fellow over here is thinking deeply and long term." When not praising his own profundity, he parroted the same pre-prepared answers, irrespective of the question he was asked. What did he think about the Gujarat riots? "The real issue at hand here is empowering the women of the country," he replied. Why he had not spoken up when his government had sold coal reserves and telecom rights to party cronies for a fraction of their true worth. The real issue here is bringing youngsters into the political system. Outnumbering the poster images of Gandhi and Kejriwal many times over, the Delhi streets is the face of this election's overwhelming front-runner Narendra Modi, and certain winner by a very large majority. Modi is the Hindu nationalist son of a station chaiwala, and as different as a man as could be imagined from the Shahzada or the princeling, as Modi mockingly refers to the heir to the Nehru-Gandhi dynasty. The election in most of the country has been an unequal contest between the Modi juggernaut and a beleaguered Rahul, who is in the process of taking the can for the failings of a government he didn't lead and can do little to redeem. Now about Modi, he's teetotal and vegetarian and lives an almost monastic lifestyle, one told me. He's extremely focused. When he talks to you, he really listens. He can focus like few people I know. He calls it a day by 11 and gets up at 4 in the morning, another aide said. He spends the first 90 minutes of the day happily surfing the internet for articles about himself. His staff start getting calls by 5:30 latest. He is obsessed with personal hygiene, said a third. He changes his clothes at least 4 or 5 times a day, and he always eats alone, always. And then there is much more hard-hitting analysis of what happened in Gujarat, which is a stain on his character, I think, and further stain is the way he sort of shrugs it all off by described, deaths of some Muslims, like, how he would feel if a puppy was run over by a car. But it is obviously played extremely well within the context of the election. I'll put up a photograph of him. I'm sure he'll accelerate India Inc. along the Gujarat model, but the social consequences of a very exclusive view about India Inc. is, however, difficult to model in my view. Sea strife follows Obama in Asia. US President Barack Obama's late April visit to Asia, where he met leaders of Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, and Philippines, was aimed at reassuring allies in the region of Washington's commitment to serving as an anchor of stability in Asia. But Obama's tour may have had the opposite effect. Maritime tensions between Southeast Asian countries and China have intensified since President Obama's visit last month, with the usually restrained Vietnam demonstrating its willingness to test the limits of American security commitments by dispatching vessels in an altercation with Chinese ships. ASEAN chairman Myanmar is also put to the test, and indeed this has been a direct consequence, and I think in part because President Obama was fairly forthright in his support for Japan, and I think that some of the other allies have taken that at its word. My question now really is around the leash that President Obama is holding over his allies, and how tight it might be, and the cause and effect of if he pulls it, how is it going? And I'm not sure his pulling capacity is going to be that great going forward. Hundreds of Chinese apparently had fled Vietnam either by air or by crossing into neighboring Cambodia. This is latest reports. More than 20 people were killed and rioters attacked Vietnam's biggest steel plant overnight, as violent anti-China protests spread to the center of the country a day after arson and looting in the south, a doctor in newspapers said on Thursday. A doctor at a hospital in central Ha Tinh province said 5 Vietnamese workers and 16 other people described as Chinese were killed in the rioting. I'll put up a photograph I found on the Times of Oman of mobs setting fire to foreign factories in Vietnam, and take you back to that image of the snake, which was an installation by Ai Weiwei, which for me best encapsulates the pivot, which is about the encirclement of China and then sort of trying to constrain. And the Chinese Daily called it the cage China idea. And I think that best symbolizes for me that the fact that the pivot is an encirclement, and then you light up the periphery and you can see how the periphery is currently lit up, whether it's in Xinjiang, Vietnam, and many other places. Interesting analysis in Eurasia. While sectarian fault lines largely define the Middle East geopolitical order, that's Iran on one side, Saudi Arabia on the other, a Sunni Cold War is simultaneously influencing the regional network of alliances, and that was the point I was making in that piece about the President's Qatar visit and the fact that Qatar was on one side of that. And then an interesting essay in the FT about saying, in reality, China is still in the East India Company stage of global economic strategy, opportunistic and pragmatic rather than ideological and intellectually coherent. I said China is like any other country, and the course is surely determined by a very hard-nosed view of its own national interest. In Africa, some might regard China as a Santa Claus, but they too will be disavowed of this notion. China's thirst for commodities and fuel for its economic engine predictably lifted the entire commodity price curve. China saw this in advance and realized quickly that Africa could slake its thirst if they moved in. I think that was what they understood well. Currency markets, the euro is at 137.15, and I'm going to get to why, but the finger is itching and it's on the trigger in the ECB. Dollar index 80.04, nearing the top of the range. Japanese yen 101.86, much stronger than expected GDP expansion in Q1. Swiss franc 0.8897. The pound slipped off from last trading at 167.70, but I'm looking to re-enter on the long side. Aussie 0.9376, India Rupee 59.44. I think it's headed to 57.50. South Korean won 10.25.75. The Rial is at 220.26. Egyptian pound, which has been slipping of late, and yesterday's drop was much faster than previous deterioration. So keep an eye on that, 7.10.49. And the Rand, 10.31.23. I think we're going to get to 10. Japan's economy accelerated in the first quarter, grew at the fastest pace since 2011 in the first quarter. GDP grew an annualized 5.9% from the previous quarter, and that was much faster than the 4.2% median forecast. Therefore it's signaling that the economy might be more resilient than some people had thought. Consumer spending rose 2.1% from the previous quarter, the highest since a 2.2% increase in the first 3 months of 1997. So that's pretty interesting. I like this quote about sterling. Sterling will come back to fight another day, said Gavin Friend, a foreign exchange strategist at the National Australia Bank. I agree with him. Dynamics of a strengthening economy place the UK well above its peers, and it's likely to be the first major economy to raise interest rates, and I'd agree with that as well. Euro dollar 137.15. The bazooka's cocked and the fingers on the trigger. I learned from Lorenzo bin Smaghi, and I'll put up his photograph. He's the man in the middle at Mr. Conforti's conference that I attended in Milan, and he very much indicated that the ECB is ready, there is a consensus, and the bazooka is going to get fired. So I think that's going to keep the euro under pressure for now. Charles W. Calamaris, however, speaking, who's this author of this book, which I'm going to go and read, Fragile by Design, and I'm talking about him in the context of the dollar, and I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index. It's 80.04. This is the top of the trading range. I'll put up a photograph of Charles that I took as we sat talking outside in the Four Seasons. He thinks US rates are going to rise much sooner and much higher than the markets are currently priced in, and that's going to be dollar positive. But for now, the dollar is not taking that on board. I think the question around the dollar will be when the market feels that, or ahead of that. That's the time to get long. Etihad Airways is installing a 125 square foot 3-room suite it calls the Residence, and sells as a premium cabin in its new Airbus A380 Super Jumbos. The space, which costs about $43,000 for some flights, is priced to include 2 travelers and comes with a butler, a chef, and a shower. My goodness. Gold, I'm going to put up a 1-year chart. We're back above 1300 at 1303.795. I'm not a bull, as you already know. Crude came off yesterday, 101.51 last. I'll put up a 6-month chart. It's rich and expensive above 100. And structurally, I think the oil price is headed lower over the next 2 to 3 years. India's Sensex is at all-time highs. As I'll put up a long-term chart, you'll see. And that's really the Modi dividend feel-good factor. India Rupee, I'll put up a 1-year chart, 59.44. And I think with Modi and with the central bank governor, you've got the ingredients for an economy that will grow much faster than it has been under Congress, which is why I think you've got a bunch of people getting excited about it, and him. South African all share up 8.82% and closed at a fresh record high yesterday. Dollar Rand 10.3129. I'll put up a 6-month chart, and I think we hit to 10, of course, and I've been saying that for a while, before 11. Egyptian pound, now that's been slipping, 7.1049. Keep an eye on that, because that's begun to soften quite dramatically. The stock market, meanwhile, has been racing ahead at a fresh more than 60-month high. It's up 26.63% this year. The Nigerian all share improving from, it's now down 2.21%. And I saw some data out of the Nairobi Securities Exchange, which indicated foreigners had been on the buy side in a big way in the first quarter. Ghana Stock Exchange up 3.95% this year, but your returns have been crushed by a crumbling cedi, which was down more than 23% year to date as of yesterday. The IMF says it will delay the disbursement of $6 million in aid to Mali, pending a clarification from the government on the purchase of a $40 million presidential jet, an IMF spokesman said. The controversy over the jet and a separate loan for military supplies risks undermining confidence in Mali's donor-backed recovery from twin crises in 2012. IMF spokesman said the organization questions the rationale of and procedures that led to Mali buying the jet given the country's pledges to fight poverty. IMF has also flagged concerns about a separate 100 billion CFA franc, which is $209 million state guarantee issued for a loan secured by a private company with a Malian bank to provide supplies for the army. Getting satisfactory information about these transactions and reassurances that the authorities will stand behind the fiscal stability and sound public financial management practices objectives of their arrangement with the IMF will take time. But therefore, we've got a couple of issues developing over there. IMF agreed a $46 million financial aid package for Mali in December to help with this balance of payments and restore economic growth. Kagame's Singapore of Africa economy rewards debt. Growth in Rwanda will reach 7.5% this year, up from 5% in 2013, versus 5.4% for all of sub-Saharan Africa, the IMF said last month. Rwanda's first dollar bonds, sold in April last year, returned 9.3% since 31st of December, compared with 6.6% for emerging market peers. President Kagame said in January he may return to markets this year to borrow about $1 billion. Foreign aid has resumed, of course, after that falling out over the DRC. Rwanda is a sound macroeconomic story, and that is why the bond has done so well. And then another analyst saying, progress includes government reforms, a reduction in crime, improving infrastructure. In-house, we call it the Singapore of Africa. And I'll put up a photograph of when I did Mind Speak with the President Kagame in Rwanda. And I used that quote by Victor Hugo. There is nothing like a dream to create the future. And indeed, he's created a new future. There are tensions underneath the surface, but in terms of the economy, he's got everything right. And I'll put up a link for that Mind Speak session where he spoke. So he spoke, threw away his notes, and then spoke from the heart very powerfully. They're all coming here, chapter 1. You've got to read the whole thing. It's very, very well written. They're all coming here, maybe not now, maybe not next year, but they are coming. Halliburton, Monsanto, Nike, Samsung, they're all coming. Our driver's name is Edward. He's in his mid-30s, white and born in Kenya, with rosy cheeks and blonde curly hair. His English accent is the kind that some might call archaic, others might say it's colonial. Hours earlier, Edward told me he'd finally found a pilot who had agreed to fly our motley crew into war-torn South Sudan, specifically the volatile rebel-held region. South Sudan is Africa's and the world's newest sovereign nation. It was granted independence on July 9, 2011, following a referendum that passed with more than 98% of the vote. You've got to read the story. A couple of factual inaccuracies. He talks of President Kenyatta's family having an involvement in Safaricom. That wasn't the case. It was President Moi's family. But it gives you a real flavour of life here sometimes. Uganda has made it a crime to willfully and intentionally transmit HIV virus and made it legal for medical staff to disclose a patient's HIV status to others without his or her consent. I don't really have an issue with that, I'm afraid. Willfully and intentionally. That's practically murder. Kenya extends payment on $600 million loan as Eurobond is delayed again. This is Javier Blas and the FT. They've extended the syndicated loan by 3 months following an 11th-hour agreement. Treasury officials said negotiations with the 3 international banks underwriting the loan were concluded only on Tuesday, 2 days before the repayment date. It hoped to repay the 2012 loan with some of the $2 billion it expects to raise in its much-delayed first sovereign bond. A person familiar with the matter said although most of the dozens of lenders within the syndicate were happy to extend the loan on existing terms, some nevertheless still requested repayment on May 15 as originally promised. Less than a third of the total loan, equivalent to less than $200 million, will be paid out on Thursday, according to the person, by the underwriters rather than by the Kenyan government. The Kenyan government is saying we have the money in our back pocket, the ability to pay back all the loan in one shot, but for a whole variety of reasons it makes sense to extend this by 3 months. Clearly the issue is a political one, in that more work has to be done with Parliament to persuade them that they need to pay what is essentially an odious settlement from the majority of people's view over here, and that it was the whole Anglo leasing saga was a scam. and the feeling is that it was not defended with any vigour in the courts, and therefore the settlement remains problematic. But the point is that you can't look through, everyone's not looking through all that. They're just looking at a situation where you've lost in the court. There is a settlement that's been agreed and you're not paying it, and that's an international obligation. According to global data, Block 10 BB13T alone could generate approximately $10 billion in revenue over a 30-year production period based on regional geological characteristics and well test results. Global data are saying that this could translate to 0.83% annually on GDP. Look, the oil and gas is a massive game changer. I've said it before and I'll say it again. And I think even those numbers don't take it fully into account. FDI flows may climb to $1 billion in the year through June from about 400 million a year earlier. This is the Industrialization Secretary Aidan Mohammed talking yesterday in an interview in Nairobi. We expect private funding for power generation to dramatically increase FDI flows. Then they will target the same amount of investment in the fiscal year starting July 1st. FDI flows in Kenya represented 1% of GDP in 2011, compared with 4.6% and 5.3% in Tanzania and Uganda respectively. So I'm expecting to see a big surge in that as well. Bata Shoe Company is set to open its largest retail store in Africa on Windu Bingu Street, and actually in my uncle's property, so he was quite excited about that. Kenya's antitrust authority may force Lafarge to sell some of its interests in the East African country if the cement maker is found to be flouting domestic competition rules, the head of the agency said. The Competition Authority of Kenya is probing Lafarge's influence on Kenya's cement industry through its 59% stake in Bamburi Cement and 42% stake in East African Portland. The findings will be published next month, the Director General Francis Kariuki said in an interview on May the 9th. And they do have a very strong position, but the word on the street is that the EAPCC, which is one of the two companies which they have a stake in and would be the one I suspect they'd relinquish, is a Dangote set-up trade. I'll put up a photograph that when I had dinner with him in Nairobi, and I thank the Koinanges for arranging that. Kenya's shilling was last at 87.282. It's been softening of late because there are lots of big dividend payments going out. More than 50% of Kenya Inc. The stock market is owned by UK Inc. And therefore this is the time when you get the dividend payments being upstreamed to the parent companies. Nairobi all share up 10.706% this year. NSE 20 is up 0.02845% this year. And it had been on a real hot streak and setting a sequence of all-time highs. Just about 1% under a record high. But we had good strong turnover. Obviously Safaricom, where you've had a bit of what I would call buy the rumour, sell the fact type trading. People just are booking their profits after they released what I thought were very good results and deserve a better price, and I think you'll get that once we've had the small, rather orderly price correction. Lemuru Tea surged, it's 8.06% yesterday, it's up 34% this year. That's all about very steep discount to its net asset value. Kenya Airways up 0.8% to 12.55. Standard Group bounced 3.65%. That's been on the bounce since the announcement of the Times Media Nairobi Radio Africa acquisition, which made Standard look very cheap in the comparison. Housing Finance, big winner yesterday, now up 23% in 2014, up today as well. Liberty Kenya traded just under 1% of its shares and traded lower, but it's had a good rally of about 32.89% even after yesterday's correction. Of course, CFC, Stanbic, has been on a roll. That's up 70% plus this year. And what's interesting is we've got some of the smaller companies beginning to perform well. Everready now up 44.44% this year. Unga up 47.222% this year. We've seen good performance in those tiddlers as they are, as the market has broadened out. Once again, thank you for listening. Thank you for stopping by. Speak to you tomorrow.